Alright, hello and welcome to another really kind of late review. At this point, pretty much everybody has already really put out a review for Dark Souls, the board game. So I'm kind of playing catch up.
Come on, guys, wait up! Come on, guys! Come on, guys, wait up!
Dark Souls, though, fortunately I do like. I have a bit of a mix-like for it, but I'll explain that as I go along. I do have to mention one kind of big caveat before I really get deeply into the review. I had one tile that unfortunately looked normal on one side and had the tile artwork on the back side. Normally not a big deal, but it did affect one of the main sort of aspects of Dark Souls board game, which was traps. I had the trap symbol on one side and just tile arc on the other, which kind of defeats the purpose of the trap because you don't know actually what's under it. They're all just blank in this case. I did get to test that feature out with a friend, and I've tried to talk to Steamforged Games to see about getting a replacement tile, but unfortunately their customer service kind of seems to suck right now. One thing that is fantastic about Dark Souls, the board game, though, is the components. I do feel like Steamforged Games did a really good job with the boss miniatures. They look like they're lifted straight from the video game, and they're big, imposing monsters that just look like, oh boy, we're going to have some trouble. Even the player character ones look pretty well detailed. They stand out, they look different. Each class kind of looks individual. Even the smaller monsters have their little details on them. They're just really nice looking. Miniatures aside, though, the character dashboards are, I think, great. They hold most of the information needed. All their slots, all their character items, your leveling up, your endurance bar, everything's basically, this is all you need to actually play. And that's pretty nice. The only thing I would have maybe preferred they had is maybe how much it costs to level up. That's the only thing I feel like could have possibly been added on these dashboards. Other than that, though, no real complaints. The tiles are nice and big. They're relatively clear. I will say the node system is a little confusing at first, largely because, if you look at it like this, it's kind of weird, but if you turn it on its side, you'll kind of notice that, oh, it's just a 3x3 grid. And also, that brings me to another point, the rulebook itself. The rulebook itself is nice. It's relatively clear. The worst part about it, though, is it really needs more examples. The boss monsters, for example, they put in a really nice example of how a boss monster would move. They put really good examples of how, the node system works, things like that. But they put in the simplest example possible. So in a case, where the boss monster is facing one enemy, but there's another enemy right behind him, how does that work? It doesn't really explain also, which you would think would be self-explanatory, but on the boss monster cards there is the nodes. It seemed to me a little difficult to figure out, which one's front, which one's left, which one's right. It should be obvious, but it's just like, I was trying to orient it with the board or orient it with the card, and it just didn't cross my mind at first. The cardstock's really nice. The only really sort of maybe semi-bad thing is the box itself is a little small. It's hard to fit everything back into. I feel that's because they also oversized everything. I mean, these tiles are huge. These are bigger than Zombicide tiles. They are just some of the biggest tiles I've ever seen. And that's kind of weird considering usually you only have about maybe 5-6 things on these tiles at once. I feel like they could have maybe gone a little bit smaller with everything. But then again, these are pretty impressive. So let's get into the game. Dark Souls, if you don't know, is based off the video game of the same name. And in Dark Souls, the video game, well, what do? You run around, you die a lot, and try to beat a bunch of bosses. Yeah, there's more story to it than that. There's kind of more reason for you doing that, but essentially that's what you do. Dark Souls is known for being extremely unforgiving, punishing, and hard. but not unfairly. Once you kind of learn the way enemies work, the way the bosses move, their attack patterns, you get more skillful and you figure out ways to beat them. Even some people can, they never level up and they can beat the most challenging boss in the game, which is an incredible feat. How well does Dark Souls, the board game, live up to that legacy? Well, it's actually not bad. Dark Souls, the board game, much like its actual video game counterpart, I would say gives a very, very poor first impression. The first time I played this with a friend, it was just a duo. We were still kind of learning the rules and everything, but it took us, I would say, approximately 3 hours to just lose horribly to the mini boss. And the normal game is several encounters, mini boss, several more encounters, big boss. So we didn't even get through the mini boss in all that time, and it just felt hard, just unfairly hard, and kind of not fun. I really was like, I don't know if I'm going to like this game. But I didn't want to give, just go off my first impression. There are quite a few games I've had, really bad first impression, but after kind of actually learning and digesting the rules a bit more, the game makes a little more sense. And that's kind of the case here. The more I played it, the more I was able to, just like the video game, learn sort of enemy attack patterns, the way they moved, and I could kind of manipulate where they went, who they attacked, and, sort of the best case scenario to get through each encounter. Now, there are some caveats to that. The enemy variety is mixed. There's really only 5 or 6 normal minions that you face, which once you learn their basic attack patterns, they're all relatively easy to beat. Even the big guy who's got 10 health, this guy, he's not so a big deal when you actually encounter him, because by then you have some of the best armor, maybe some of the best weapons. You're pretty strong. So really, even though he does, I believe, 6 damage in one poke, you can mitigate most of that. And so he's really not as threatening as he looks. Now, bosses, on the other hand, there are several bosses that come in the core set. We've got, I believe, 4 mini bosses and 3 big bosses. Well, really 2 big bosses, because one boss you actually fight 2 characters at the same time. They are hard. They are not easy. Even if you have the best equipment, one wrong dice roll or one wrong movement can really damage any potential and any hope of actually defeating said boss. I did not get to try every single combination of, duo, triple, 4-player against every single mini boss and every single boss. This game is long. The box says 90 to 120 minutes. I mean, like I said, the first time I played this, 3 hours, just to get to the mini boss and then lose horribly. There are other times, as I played more and more, we could get through the mini boss in about 120 minutes. So you can get through about half the game in the stated time. You could really do a bunch of stuff and set up checkpoints and such, so it's not like you have to get through all the way to the boss in one playthrough, but nonetheless, that game is long, and it is not easy, and if you die, sometimes that's it, game over. A big thing about the game, though, is I feel that balance really isn't there. It kind of goes out the window. If you play solo and you're just using one character, the actual encounters themselves are going to feel a lot harder. Largely because you can't really bounce damage off of anybody else. Now, there are ways to kind of mitigate that. You can step back, use more stamina just for movement versus attacking. So there is kind of a lot more tactical options when you're playing solo, same with duo. Now, on the flip side, if you're playing with 4 players, I feel that the scenarios themselves tend to be a lot easier. And that's largely because you can figure out ways to kind of bounce the damage around. So even if your team isn't equipped fully or has the best equipment, you can bounce that damage around each other. Now I feel that kind of flips when you get to the bosses. When you're on your own, the boss just feels much easier in a way. You can kind of memorize their pattern, move back, manipulate them, and you go, then the boss goes, you go, then the boss goes. And like nobody's really left in a spot. You may still die. I'm not going to say the boss gets really like super easy, but at least, it's on you. It's on that one character. Versus when you have 4 people, it's a little bit harder because the boss is going to react in between each person's turn. And especially at the beginning, the boss tiles, those bosses move pretty far. There's even some attacks where they can jump halfway across the map and just attack you. And they hit in an arc. So they can hit every single node in front of them. Which is just kind of unfair when you have 4. You have the 4th person who, doesn't get to move for 4 attacks. 4 movements, 4 attacks. It's a lot of damage to worry about. Now, you will probably be relatively equipped, so it's not as bad as it sounds, but it's not as balanced as it could be. I also do feel that with 4 players you get more damage done quicker, and solo you kind of have the problem of, if I didn't bring the right weapons and this and that. It's a weird sort of balance that isn't quite there. And I do feel that this game is going to heavily rely on expansions, perhaps. One, like I mentioned, the enemy variety. There's only about 5 or 6 enemies, and kind of once you know their pattern. With expansions, that's probably going to change. There will be, I know at least there's one expansion that's kind of the mushroom area from Dark Souls. But there might be, I know there's Invaders expansion as well. I'm not sure if there's any other enemies. I know there's the mega bosses, which is even harder than the bosses. So there's that to look forward to. So there's 2 ways to play Dark Souls, the board game. There's the campaign, and then there's the standard mode. I'm going to say right off the bat, campaign mode is largely a loss for me. I don't think it's very fun. Largely because you can play it endlessly. Everything is doubled. The cost to level up is doubled. The cost to buy weapons is doubled. Everything is doubled. Except for how many enemies you encounter. But just the leveling up aspect is doubled. Which, yes, makes it harder to level up and everything. But considering you can buy sparks to avoid death and permanently into the game, you can just farm and 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 farm until you finally get everything you want. I just don't think that's fun. I didn't find it as fun as standard play. Standard play I actually found to be a lot of fun. Largely, even though the item deck is randomized, you're not going to get everything you want, which that part sucks. I'm not saying that's a great feature, but I did find it fun to be like, okay, I got this. Now, let's see. So if I level this person up, they can use it. But then I got to worry about, maybe this other weapon that I got that I really want to get to the... So there was this little bit more balance because I felt that with standard play, you have a limited number of souls you can actually farm. And so by the end, I never really got super powerful. I got powerful, and most of the encounters were never a trouble, but I knew that when I got to the boss, I'm still going to have a little bit of trouble. And getting through the entire treasure deck is possible, but it's not optimal. You're going to miss out on leveling up certain characters to equip certain equipment. And so it's really this nice little balance between, what equipment am I going to use? What's the best for this team? What's best for me? The thing I did kind of experiment with was fighting with the worst equipment possible. That is something in Dark Souls, the video game, that is kind of a big pride. If you can punch one of the bosses to death, it's an amazing feeling that if you can even hope to accomplish that. It takes forever. And basically, the board game, I was like, I wonder if it is possible for just the lowliest equipped knight to somehow defeat one of the bosses. I really only experimented fighting the gargoyle, but I found that it is possible, but very, 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 very unlikely. I played assuming that, I memorized the entire moveset and knew exactly how the gargoyle was going to move, at least for a couple of turns. Would I be able to maneuver the boss around, hit the weak point every time possible? And yeah, I was kind of able to do that sometimes, but again, I assumed a lot. And still, if the boss moved straight into the center of the tile, the next turn he was definitely going to hit me. And with the barest equipment, you're going to not really be able to mitigate that damage enough, and he's just going to whittle down your health very, very, very quickly. I think on one time I actually got him to about 18 health, which isn't quite halfway, but it still felt kind of interesting to do. I didn't do that too much, but it was just kind of interesting to see if it's even possible. That kind of brings to another factor, is that this game does have a fair amount of luck to it. The dice rolling, unfortunately, brings with it a little bit of luck. One thing the video game excels at is making you feel accomplished and sort of showing player skill and learning attack patterns, all that sort of thing. And while the board game tries to emulate a little bit of that by having certain move sets for the bosses and kind of this node system that you can try to manipulate around, the unfortunate thing is the arenas tend to not be quite big enough to really manipulate things too much. Not to mention that you can be right on top of an enemy and completely miss because your dice roll, you rolled 2 blanks on your 2 blacks. Or you rolled, 1 blue, 1 black, and it happened to be the 1 sword on blue and a blank on the black, which means most enemies would be able to deflect that. And that kind of thing just sucks a little bit. Still, though, even though with the luck factor and sort of that skill isn't quite super important, I did find there is a fair amount of tacticalness to it. There is, if you move into certain nodes, you can make enemies go one way instead of going for your teammates, or, just kind of manipulate the board a little bit. And that was kind of a cool feeling once you got kind of how these enemies move about, how they push you and move you around the board, that sort of thing. There were just ways to kind of manipulate where enemies go. The one part that does suck with the luck factor right now is dodge and block. Block is far superior to dodge for the most part. Even with the assassin at having 4 dodge die at one point, you still can roll all blanks, and when you need just 1, it's just like, it's very frustrating to have that happen. It doesn't happen as often. The dodge dice are 50-50, but still, I've had cases where I rolled 4 dodge die and got 4 blanks, and then the assassin took 6 damage. That's not as fun as it could be. All in all, my verdict for Dark Souls, the board game, it is a relatively faithful adaptation of Dark Souls, the video game. It is not perfect. It does have some weird choices. It has some sort of luck in it that doesn't quite translate very well from the video game. But it is an enjoyable system. I know right now there's huge discussions on house rules and different sort of rules for making the game even better. I have not tried any of those as of yet, so I will not comment on house rules at this moment. But I do feel it is a decent game, even straight out of the box. I would say don't play campaign mode. It's not worth it right now. Maybe in the expansion, if they add some sort of mechanic that maybe the bosses kind of are different in campaign mode than they are in normal mode, perhaps I will find that mode to be a lot better. Right now, though, I'd say stick to standard play. Standard play is a lot quicker. Just seems a little bit more fun to me to find that sort of balance between leveling up and getting new equipment versus saving souls and trying to get more so that we can get the big kind of soul level up rewards. So in closing, I think Dark Souls is a board game. If you really like Dark Souls, the video game, and you want a board game version of it, this is really not too bad. Will we ever see sort of a patch or a second edition? I have no idea. The first edition did make a lot of money, so it's possible they'll revamp the rules at some point, make it even better. But we'll just have to wait and see. Till then, there's house rules and all sorts of enhancements and ideas out there to make this game even better than what's currently on offer in the base set. So that's my review. If you like this review, like and subscribe, comment below, let me know how you feel, and see you next review. Bye.